Another one of those systems is the way that we talk about climate change. Generation Nero has a whole chapter that analyzes how the media has shaped the public's perception, and it's really fascinating.
I was surprised by how much Williams focused on the media. But then again, they are the ones telling the story, right?
Exactly. And what Williams points out is that, especially early on, the media often presented climate change as a debate. They were giving equal weight to climate scientists and to skeptics, even though the scientific consensus was already overwhelmingly pointing to human-caused warming.
Yeah, it's like if you're arguing with a climate denier, you're both wrong. The science has been settled for years.
Yeah, exactly. But by presenting it as this debate, the media created this perception that the science was still unsettled. And that really delayed action. It allowed for this doubt and skepticism to take root, even as the evidence became more and more clear.
So the media inadvertently gave a platform to climate deniers that they really didn't deserve.
That's one of the arguments that Williams makes. And he also talks about how the media's focus on, doom and gloom narratives can actually be counterproductive.
Right. Like, if you're constantly being told that the world is ending, why bother doing anything?
Yeah.
It can be so overwhelming.
It creates this sense of hopelessness and apathy, and it leads to inaction.
But Williams does point to some more positive trends in media coverage, right? Like this rise in solutions-oriented journalism.
Yeah, he's hopeful about this shift toward constructive journalism, where media outlets are focusing not just on the problems, but also on the potential solutions and the people who are driving change.
Yeah, like showing people that there is hope.
Yeah.
That there are things we can do.
Exactly.
That we're not powerless.
Generation Nero emphasizes the importance of, providing accurate science-based information, but also highlighting solutions, showcasing success stories, and emphasizing that individual actions can actually make a difference.
So it's not just about scaring people into action. It's about inspiring them.
Right. We need a media landscape that informs and inspires and empowers people to take action.
So we've talked about the politics, the economics, the media, but Generation Nero also goes into some of the psychological barriers that people have to taking action. And this is where things get really interesting. Because even when people understand the science and the urgency, there's still this hesitation.
It's true. There are these deep-seated psychological barriers that prevent us from doing what needs to be done.
So what are some of those barriers?
Well, Williams talks about this concept called cognitive dissonance, where we hold these conflicting beliefs and we try to rationalize our behavior even when we know it's harmful.
So like someone could acknowledge that climate change is real, but they still drive a gas-guzzling SUV
Exactly.
and fly all over the place.
It's easier to justify those actions than to make fundamental changes to our lifestyle.
And it's not just about denial or hypocrisy. Generation Nero talks about this idea of temporal discounting, where we prioritize immediate gratification over long-term consequences.
Yeah, it's that whole I'll worry about it later mentality. We know climate change is a threat, but the worst effects seem so far off.
We just keep kicking the can down the road,
Exactly.
hoping it'll magically fix itself.
Which is a dangerous gamble, especially when you consider what we know about those tipping points that we talked about earlier.
And then there's this whole other layer of psychological barriers like climate anxiety,
Yeah.
the feeling of being completely helpless.
It's understandable, though, right? When you really grasp the scale of the problem, it can be totally paralyzing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel like your individual actions don't really matter.
Yeah.
It just leads to more apathy and more inaction.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is.
So how do we break free from that?
Well, Williams suggests a few strategies. One is to focus on solutions. Focus on the positive things people are doing to address the crisis, highlighting success stories, showing the impact of collective action. All of that can inspire hope and a sense of agency.
It's about showing people that their actions do matter, that we're not powerless.
Right.
And what about this idea of building community?
Yeah, connecting with other people who are working towards the same goals. When you're part of a movement, you're not just an individual facing this global crisis. You're part of a collective force for change.
So it's about finding ways to connect, to join movements,
Yeah.
to be part of something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And remember, we're not just passive passengers on this planet. We're citizens. We have the power to demand action from our leaders.
So it's not just about individual actions, it's about systemic change as well.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we need both individual and collective action to address this crisis.
Williams uses this really powerful analogy in the book, Nero fiddles while Rome burns.
It's a good one.
It's this reminder that while we're all distracted by, the trivialities of modern life, the planet is literally burning.
It is a striking image.
He draws these parallels between the decadence and the complacency of Rome under Nero and our response to the climate crisis.
Yeah, and it's not just about fiddling, literally.
Right, it's like we're all scrolling through social media and binge-watching Netflix
Exactly.
while the planet burns.
It's a bit harsh, but it's hard to argue with.
Yeah.
You know, he points out that we're so consumed by the distractions of modern life that we're failing to grasp the urgency of the situation.
And, Nero's Rome was plagued by this excessive luxury,
Yeah.
political corruption, and a real disconnect between the leadership and the people.
It's a pattern that we've seen repeated throughout history.
When societies become too focused on their own pleasure and their own self-interest, they kind of lose sight of these long-term threats.
And Williams argues that we're repeating those same mistakes.
But on a global scale.
We're prioritizing economic growth and material consumption over the long-term health of the planet.
So are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past?
Not necessarily. That's where the hope comes in. Williams believes we can break free from this cycle.
Okay.
But we have to learn from history and take action. It's not too late.
So we've talked about these barriers to action, the psychology, the historical parallels. But Generation Nero doesn't just dwell on the problems. It also shines a light on some solutions. What are some of those bright spots?
Well, one of the most exciting areas is the incredible progress being made in renewable energy. The cost of solar and wind power has just plummeted in recent years, making them more and more competitive with fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with how fast things are changing.
It is.
So we're not just waiting for some future tech miracle. The solutions are already here.
They are.
That's encouraging.
And they're being implemented successfully all over the world.
Like Denmark.
Denmark's a great example. They now generate over 40% of their electricity from wind power.
That's amazing.
They've really embraced this transition.
What other innovations does Williams highlight?
He also dives into energy efficiency and conservation. You know, we often underestimate the power of simply using less energy.
The greenest kilowatt hour is the one you never use.
Exactly.
What about transportation?
Oh, yeah. Generation Nero highlights the potential of electric vehicles and high-speed rail. Imagine cities filled with silent, zero-emission vehicles connected by these efficient, high-speed rail lines.
That does sound pretty futuristic.
It does, but these technologies are already being developed and deployed.
So we have the tools, we have the technology.
Yeah.
But as Generation Nero points out, there are some serious barriers to actually putting these solutions into practice.
There are.
What are some of the things that are holding us back?
Well, one of the biggest is lack of infrastructure. We need to update electrical grids to handle all this new renewable energy, and we need more charging stations for all these electric vehicles.
And then there's the political resistance from the fossil fuel industry, right?
Yeah, they're not going to go down without a fight.
It's David and Goliath.
It is.
But Generation Nero reminds us that we can't underestimate the power of public pressure.
That's right. When citizens demand change, governments and corporations have to listen.
So it's not just about technological innovation. It's about political and social transformation.
Absolutely, and it's about changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, there are still so many myths about renewable energy.
There are.
Like that they're not reliable.
Yeah, but Generation Nero debunks those myths, explaining that technologies like battery storage can address those concerns.
So it's about educating ourselves, dispelling those myths,
Yeah.
and being advocates for the solutions
Yes.
that are already out there.
And then there's the cost factor. You know, transitioning to a clean energy economy requires upfront investment.
Which can be a barrier.
It can be a barrier for governments and businesses that are focused on short-term profits.
But Williams argues that those short-term costs are nothing compared to the long-term cost of inaction.
Exactly, the economic and social costs of climate change. From extreme weather disasters to climate-induced migration to the loss of ecosystem services, all of that will far outweigh the costs of investing in a sustainable future.
So it's about taking that long-term perspective
It is.
and recognizing that the true cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of investing in a sustainable future.
Exactly, and it's about recognizing that investing in a clean energy transition, it creates jobs, it boosts local economies, and it reduces our dependence on these volatile fossil fuel markets.
So it's not just about saving the planet, it's about creating a more just and equitable economic system.
Absolutely, we can have a healthy economy and a healthy planet.
They're not mutually exclusive.
They're not. One depends on the other.
Okay, so we've talked about the solutions, but what about the places where climate policies have fallen short?
Yeah, Williams believes it's important to learn from past mistakes. And he analyzes both international agreements and national policies that haven't produced the results that we need.
And he uncovered some surprising things,
They
right?
did.
Like what?
Well, he found that some countries have met their emission targets on paper, but they've achieved that by shifting their carbon footprint elsewhere through outsourcing. It's called carbon leakage. It's basically a shell game where countries make themselves look good while the problem just gets shifted around.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly, and it highlights the need for greater transparency and accountability in these international climate agreements.
Yeah, we need to look beyond the superficial progress
We do.
and examine the real impact.
And even well-intentioned policies often fail because of things like weak enforcement mechanisms, lack of funding, and conflicting interests.
So good intentions aren't enough.
They're not.
We need to hold our leaders accountable.
We do.
Make sure they're not just paying lip service to climate action.
We need to move beyond the rhetoric and start demanding real action.
Okay, so that makes sense. But climate change is a global problem.
It is.
So Generation Nero also takes a look at the challenges of coordinating international action,
It does.
which seems really difficult.
It is a complex issue.
So what are some of the biggest obstacles?
One of the biggest is the tension between national interests and global responsibilities.
So countries are often more concerned with their own economic growth
Exactly.
and security than they are with the global environment.
It's the classic tragedy of the commons.